Outdated? After everything I've done for this company? I stared at James in disbelief, my voice barely audible in the suddenly silent conference room. "It's nothing personal, Ariana," he replied, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "We need fresh perspectives, new blood. The manufacturing industry is evolving, and we need to evolve with it." 20 pairs of eyes watched the exchange. My colleagues, people I'd worked alongside for years, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few looked down at their notebooks, avoiding the spectacle entirely. James adjusted his tie, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "HR has your severance package ready. We'll need your security badge and laptop before you leave the building." The humiliation burned through me. 20 years at Meridian Manufacturing, gone in a 5-minute speech delivered at our monthly staff meeting. I took a deep breath, rose from my chair, and nodded. "I wish you all the best," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I gathered my notepad and pen, the only personal items I'd brought to the meeting, and walked out without another word. "My name is Ariana Vasquez, 49 years old. Until 10 minutes ago, I was the production systems manager at Meridian Manufacturing, one of the largest custom metal fabrication companies in Chicago. I started as an assistant on the factory floor when I was 29 and worked my way up, learning every aspect of our production systems, both the visible ones on paper and the invisible ones that kept everything running smoothly. For 2 decades, I've been the person everyone called when things went wrong, the one who stayed late troubleshooting supplier issues, who knew which machines needed special handling, who remembered that client A needed their orders packaged a specific way, or they'd reject the entire shipment. I created workarounds and solutions that weren't in any manual because I had to. The company grew faster than our documentation could keep up. And now James Henderson, our new operations director who'd been with the company all of 6 months, had decided I was outdated. As I cleaned out my desk, my phone buzzed with messages from a few colleagues expressing shock and sympathy. I appreciated the support, but knew it wouldn't change anything. I boxed up 20 years of personal items in under 30 minutes, a depressingly small collection of photos, awards, and desk trinkets. On my way out, I passed Denise from accounting, who gave me a quick hug and whispered, "This is crazy. You know that new automated inventory system they're implementing next week? No one knows how it integrates with our payment tracking system." I smiled sadly. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But as I handed my badge to security and walked to my car, a cold realization settled in my stomach. They wouldn't figure it out. Because I was the only one who fully understood how deeply interconnected our systems were, and I had just been shown the door. My relationship with Meridian Manufacturing began when my daughter Sophia was just 4 years old. As a single mother with only an associate's degree, I was grateful for the stable job and threw myself into learning everything I could. The early years were a delicate balancing act: daycare pickups, pediatrician appointments, and late-night studying manufacturing processes after Sophia went to bed. I missed school plays and parent-teacher conferences because we had rush orders. I postponed vacations when systems needed upgrading. I skipped my own mother's 70th birthday celebration because a critical client was visiting. Meridian became my second home, and my colleagues became a kind of family. Robert, the previous operations director who retired last year, recognized my dedication. "You're the glue holding this place together, Ariana," he'd often say. Under his leadership, I was promoted 3 times, eventually overseeing all production systems. Robert understood that my value wasn't just in what I did, but in what I knew, the institutional knowledge that couldn't be captured in procedures or manuals. I tried to document the systems I'd created. I truly did. Every January, I'd start the year with the resolution to get everything on paper. But emergencies always took precedence. A supplier would suddenly go out of business. A machine would break down, or a client would need a last-minute change to a major order. The documentation remained perpetually incomplete, living largely in my head. When James Henderson arrived 6 months ago to replace Robert, I had concerns, but tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. He came from a larger manufacturing operation with impressive credentials and talked constantly about modernization and efficiency. At first, I appreciated his fresh perspective. Meridian had grown comfortable with certain inefficiencies, and some processes did need updating. I tried to work with him, explaining the complex web of systems and workarounds that kept our operation functioning. But James seemed more interested in quick wins than understanding the foundation. "We need to streamline," he'd say, waving away my explanations. "All this tribal knowledge is precisely the problem." When he announced plans to implement a new automated inventory system, I raised concerns about integration with our existing processes. "Trust me," he said, "this new system will make everything more efficient." I noticed how he started excluding me from strategic meetings, how younger employees with less experience but more technical degrees were suddenly being given projects that would normally fall under my purview, how my suggestions in meetings were frequently dismissed or interrupted. Still, I never imagined he would fire me. Not when I was the only one who understood how all the pieces fit together. Not when I had given the company 20 years of my life. That was my first mistake. 3 days after my termination, I was still in shock. I'd spent the time updating my resume, though it felt strange to condense 20 years of experience into bullet points. Sophia, now 24 and living in New York, called daily with encouragement and apartment listings in the city, suggesting maybe it was time for a change of scenery. "You've spent your whole life in Chicago, Mom. Maybe this is the universe telling you to try something new." I appreciated her optimism but wasn't ready to make any major decisions. First, I needed to process what had happened. That morning, I met Denise for coffee. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well. "It's been chaos," she said, stirring her latte absently. "The new inventory system went live yesterday, and nothing is working properly." I tried to hide my lack of surprise. Teething problems. New systems always have them. "This is more than teething problems, Ariana. Orders are getting lost, inventory counts are wrong, and no one can figure out why the system keeps rejecting certain client accounts." She leaned forward. "James is freaking out. The executive team is asking questions, and he's telling everyone that you deliberately sabotaged the integration." "What?" I nearly knocked over my coffee. "That's ridiculous. I would never do something like that." "We know that," Denise assured me. "But James needs a scapegoat." As I drove home, my shock turned to anger. After everything I'd given Meridian, James was now attacking my professional integrity. It was beyond unfair. It was potentially damaging to my career if word got out. I was still fuming when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Assuming it was a recruiter, I answered professionally. "Ariana Vasquez speaking." "Ariana, thank God." The voice was immediately recognizable. David Sinclair, Meridian's CEO. "We have a situation." The desperation in his voice was palpable. I remained silent, waiting. "Look, I'll be blunt. The new system is a disaster. We've got orders backed up, inventory missing, and 3 of our biggest clients threatening to pull their contracts if we don't resolve this immediately." He paused. "We need you back." I gripped the phone tighter. "David, James just fired me. He's telling people I sabotaged the company." "James doesn't know what he's talking about," David replied dismissively. "He didn't understand how integral you were to our operations. None of us did, really. We took your knowledge for granted." The validation I'd been seeking for years had finally arrived, but only after everything had fallen apart. Part of me wanted to savor the moment, to let them struggle as I had so many times trying to keep their systems running. But another part, the part that had poured my heart into this company for 2 decades, ached at the thought of everything I'd built crumbling. "Please, Ariana," David continued, his voice dropping to an almost pleading tone. "Come back as a consultant. Triple your previous salary. We'll make it worth your while." I sat in my car, staring at the phone, a storm of conflicting emotions washing over me. They needed me now. But where was this recognition when it actually mattered? After a sleepless night weighing my options, I agreed to return to Meridian as a consultant, but on my terms. I would work remotely, set my own hours, and my contract would include a non-disparagement clause addressing James's false accusations. David agreed immediately, desperation evident in his voice. My first day back was strange. I connected to Meridian's systems from my home office, the familiar interfaces now viewed through a different lens. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a hired gun brought in to save them from their own mistakes. It didn't take long to identify the primary issues. The new inventory system hadn't been properly integrated with the payment tracking system, exactly as I had warned. Moreover, several client-specific workarounds I'd implemented over the years had been overlooked during the transition. The system was trying to force standardization on processes that required customization. I documented the problems and solutions methodically, creating clear instructions for the IT team. By the end of the day, the most critical issues had been addressed, and orders were flowing again. I sent a comprehensive report to David, copying the relevant department heads but deliberately excluding James. The next morning, my inbox contained effusive thanks from David and several other executives. The only message from James was terse. Please copy me on all communications going forward. I replied with professional courtesy, attaching my previous report. Within an hour, he requested an emergency virtual meeting with me and the IT team. When I joined the video call, James's face appeared on my screen, tight with barely concealed anger. Ariana, while we appreciate your help with the immediate crisis, we need to discuss your approach, he began. Some of your solutions seem to be reverting us to the old methods rather than embracing the new system's capabilities. I'm using hybrid solutions that allow the new system to function with our existing client requirements, I explained. Many of our major clients have specific needs that the standard system doesn't accommodate. James shook his head. That's exactly the problem. We've invested in this system to standardize our processes. If we keep making exceptions, we'll never modernize. One of the IT specialists, Tom, unmuted himself. James, Ariana's approach is working. The critical errors have stopped, and we're processing orders again. Temporarily, James insisted, but it's not sustainable. We need to retrain our clients to work with our new standardized system. I muted myself to prevent an incredulous laugh from escaping. Retrain our clients? Some of these companies had been with Meridian for decades and represented millions in annual revenue. They wouldn't change their entire operation to accommodate our new software. The meeting continued with increasing tension. James kept pushing for his vision of complete standardization, while the IT team grew visibly uncomfortable with his dismissal of practical solutions. Later that afternoon, I received an email from James outlining a new direction for my consulting work, essentially asking me to create documentation for his standardization plan rather than fixing the immediate problems. It was a thinly veiled attempt to sideline me while still having access to my knowledge. I wrote a carefully worded response, copying David and the department heads, explaining why this approach would likely result in losing several major clients. I included revenue figures and contract terms to support my position. Within minutes, David called me directly. Ariana, ignore James's email. Continue with your current approach. You have my full authority. It was a small victory, but I knew it was temporary. James wouldn't simply accept being overruled. He would find another way to assert control and push me out again. That evening, as I reviewed system logs to track down a persistent error, I discovered something unusual. Someone had attempted to modify several key configuration files the night before I was fired. The timestamps matched a time when most employees would have been gone, but the building access logs would show who was present. I needed those logs, but requesting them would alert James that I was investigating. I needed to be clever about this. The next day, I called Denise under the pretext of needing clarification on some accounting workflows. Our conversation meandered naturally to the topic of the building's new security system installed last year. It's been a nightmare, Denise sighed. We have to badge in and out of every section, and it logs everything. HR uses it for time tracking now. That sounds tedious, I sympathized. Who manages those logs? Is it still building services? Or did they move that to IT? Neither. Everything's cloud-based now. Department heads can access their team's logs through the admin portal. This was exactly what I needed. Access to those logs would show who was in the building the night before my termination. Interesting, I said casually. Hey, since I'm working remotely, could you send me a link to that admin portal? I might need to check when certain team members were working on specific projects. Once Denise sent the link, I realized I needed login credentials. As a consultant, I no longer had admin access. I considered asking David directly, but worried it might raise questions about my intentions. Instead, I tried my old credentials on a hunch, and they worked. In their haste to bring me back as a consultant, IT had reactivated my previous access levels without adjusting the permissions. What I discovered in the logs sent a chill down my spine. The night before my termination, James had been in the building until nearly midnight, highly unusual for an operations director who typically left by 6 p.m. More importantly, he had accessed the server room using his badge. This coincided exactly with the system logs showing configuration changes. But why would James modify system configurations? He wasn't technical, and such changes would normally be handled by IT. I dug deeper into the system logs and found that the modifications were subtle but significant. Changes that would cause the new inventory system to fail in specific ways when integrated, but only under certain load conditions. The kind of failure that wouldn't appear in testing but would emerge catastrophically in production. The realization hit me like a physical blow. James had deliberately sabotaged the system, knowing it would fail after my departure. But why? What could he possibly gain from creating chaos? I spent the next 2 days discreetly investigating, careful to maintain my consultant duties while pulling on this thread. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Before joining Meridian, James had worked for Vertex Manufacturing, our largest competitor. His LinkedIn profile mentioned it briefly, but downplayed the connection. Further research revealed he had maintained stock options in Vertex even after leaving. Emails I accessed through my reinstated credentials showed James had been quietly advising several of our biggest clients to consider alternatives in the wake of our system problems. In one particularly damning message, he suggested Vertex specifically, noting their superior reliability. The truth was breathtaking in its audacity. James hadn't fired me because he thought I was outdated. He fired me because I was the only person who could prevent his sabotage plan from succeeding. He was deliberately tanking Meridian's operations to drive clients to Vertex, clients he had insider relationships with, clients whose business would significantly increase the value of his Vertex stock options. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. I had evidence of corporate espionage and sabotage, but bringing it forward would be risky. James was still an executive with significant influence. If I mishandled this, he could twist it to make me look vengeful or desperate. I needed to be strategic about how I exposed him, and I needed to be absolutely certain of my evidence before making such serious accusations. The question was, how far was I willing to go to protect a company that had discarded me after 20 years of loyalty? The answer came to me that night as I stared at my ceiling, unable to sleep. This wasn't just about Meridian or my wounded pride. It was about the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depended on the company's survival. People like Denise, who had worked alongside me for years, or Tom from IT, who was putting his kids through college with his Meridian salary. I needed irrefutable evidence and a plan to present it that couldn't be dismissed or buried. James had allies on the executive team, people he'd charmed during his short tenure. Going directly to David might not be enough if James could convince others I was fabricating claims out of resentment. The next morning, I created a secure folder containing all the evidence I'd gathered, the system logs showing the sabotage, the building access records showing James in the server room, and the emails to clients recommending Vertex. I encrypted it and stored it in multiple locations, including sending a copy to my personal lawyer, with instructions to open it only under specific circumstances. Then I set a trap. I identified the next likely target in James's sabotage plan, the production scheduling system, which was due for integration with the new inventory system the following week. If he followed his pattern, he would need to make modifications soon. I quietly implemented a monitoring protocol that would alert me to any unauthorized changes, capturing detailed logs of the activity. For 3 days, I continued my consulting work while waiting for the alert. On the fourth night, at 11:23 p.m., my phone buzzed with the notification I'd been expecting. Someone was modifying the production scheduling system's core configurations, and the monitoring protocol was capturing everything, including a video feed from the server room's security camera that I'd managed to access. The footage clearly showed James working on a server terminal, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. I watched in real time as he systematically inserted errors into the system, errors that would cause catastrophic failures once the integration went live. I immediately called David, regardless of the late hour. "I need you to come to the office right now," I said, foregoing pleasantries, "and bring the head of security. James is in the server room sabotaging the production system as we speak." To his credit, David didn't question me. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I forwarded the live security feed to David's email and then called Tom from IT, who lived closest to the office. "I need a favor," I explained. "Can you go to the office and make sure James doesn't leave the server room before David and security arrive?" While waiting for confirmation that James had been caught, I compiled my complete dossier of evidence and sent it to David with a detailed explanation of what I'd found. I included the connection to Vertex and the communications with clients. Just after midnight, David called. "We've got him," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Security is escorting him from the building. The police have been called." I exhaled slowly, tension draining from my shoulders. "You need to secure his computer and phone immediately," I advised. "And contact those clients he's been communicating with. There's no telling how many he's approached." "Already on it," David assured me. "Ariana, I don't know how to thank you. You've saved the company twice in 1 week." "I did my job," I replied simply. "The job I've always done." As I hung up, I felt an unexpected emotion wash over me. Not vindication or triumph, but a profound sadness. 20 years of my life dedicated to Meridian, and it had come to this. Saving the company from someone who had been there less than a year. But mixed with the sadness was something else, the dawning realization that I was finally free to choose what came next. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian's offices in person for the first time since my termination. The security guard greeted me with a surprise smile and a new visitor badge. "Ms. Vasquez, good to see you back." David met me in the lobby, looking exhausted but relieved. "Thank you for coming in. The board is assembling for an emergency meeting, and they've asked you to join." Walking through the familiar hallways felt surreal. Colleagues stopped to greet me, many offering quiet thanks or expressions of disbelief about James's actions. News had traveled fast. The boardroom was filled with tense executives when we entered. David guided me to a seat near the head of the table and began the meeting without preamble. "As you all know, we've uncovered evidence that James Henderson was deliberately sabotaging our systems to drive business to our competitor, Vertex Manufacturing. The police are involved, and we've already contacted our legal team about industrial espionage charges." He turned to me. "Ariana has compiled comprehensive documentation of the sabotage, which has been distributed to each of you. She was instrumental in uncovering this plot and catching James in the act." The board members reviewed the evidence in stunned silence. Finally, the chairwoman, Eleanor Barnes, looked up at me. "Ms. Vasquez, on behalf of the board, I want to extend our sincere apologies for what happened. Your termination was clearly a terrible mistake." "It was more than a mistake," I replied calmly. "It was the result of a systematic devaluation of institutional knowledge in favor of surface-level modernization. James was able to target me precisely because the company had already minimized my contributions." An uncomfortable silence followed. This wasn't what they'd expected. Contrition and gratitude, perhaps, but not a critique of their leadership culture. "You're right," David finally acknowledged. "And that's why we'd like to offer you a new position, Vice President of Systems Integration, reporting directly to me." We need someone who understands both our legacy systems and how to modernize without destroying what works. I smiled. I appreciate the offer, David, but I have a different proposal in mind. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of Meridian Manufacturing, preparing to leave after my final day as a consultant. The systems were stable, thoroughly documented, and managed by a team I had personally trained. The production floor was operating at peak efficiency, and client relationships had been largely restored. James Henderson had been arrested on corporate espionage charges, and Vertex Manufacturing was facing a major lawsuit. The scandal had made industry news, with James's reputation in ruins. Several other companies had discovered similar sabotage attempts in their systems, suggesting his scheme had been more widespread than initially thought. As for me, I had declined Meridian's offer of executive employment. Instead, I'd negotiated a 6-month consulting contract at an exceptional rate to rebuild their systems and train their staff properly. The experience had been cathartic, finally having the time and authority to document everything I'd created over 2 decades, to be recognized for my expertise, and to leave the company stronger than I found it. David approached as I prepared to leave. "Are you sure I can't convince you to stay?" he asked, not for the first time. "I'm sure," I replied. "You have my number if there's an emergency, but the team is well trained now." "And Vasquez Systems Consulting is officially open for business?" he asked with a smile. "With Meridian as my first client reference," I confirmed. "But not my only one. I've already signed contracts with 2 other manufacturers in the region." As I walked out of the building, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Apartment hunting this weekend still on?" I smiled and replied, "Absolutely. I'm thinking Manhattan might be nice." 20 years at one company had given me invaluable knowledge. The next 20 would be spent sharing that knowledge, on my terms, with proper recognition, and at a consultation rate that reflected my true value. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just proving them wrong, it's using their mistake to finally live the life you deserve.